friends. I hope you will join in. I'm on Jean Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to watch it.
With breaking news and political commentary from a public servant, serial entrepreneur, community leader, philanthropist, and American patriot, and a darn nice guy, it's time for the Grassroots Truthcast and your host, Jean Valentino.
Hi, friends, Jean Valentino, and welcome again to another episode of Jean Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. I'm joined today by the lovely Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, who lives just outside the Washington, D.C. area. Dr. Shea, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jean. It's really good to be with you. You and I have been trying to get this together for a while now, haven't we?
Oh, we sure have. Folks, this is going to be a good episode on something you think may not apply to what's in the leading news stories today here in the States. Is the just about a week away to our election here for the next president of the United States. Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell was able to join me, and I'd like her to come on. I met her at CNP conference and then again at CPAC a year prior. This is her book, The Last Warning to the West. This is Hungary's triumph over communism and the woke agenda. A very interesting deep dive on how Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell here with us today, an assistant to the president, former President Donald Trump, hopefully the next president of the United States. She worked and consulted with the Trump and the Trump family, and in a separate venue in Hungary with leaders there, including Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Let's have a break, and we'll be back right after this for more.
Because of your overwhelming support, our $14.88 MyPillow has been one of the biggest sales in MyPillow history. I couldn't think of a better way to say thank you than to extend our wholesale pricing through Christmas. Get a classic standard MyPillow for only $14.88. Upgrade to a queen size, just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for only $29.88. And ready? Multi-use MyPillows, only $9.88. It's perfect time to stock up for Christmas gifts for everyone on your list. Go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of our wholesale pricing, including my classic standard MyPillows, only $14.88. But that's not all. I'm so confident you're going to love our classic MyPillows that I'm going to extend my 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, orders over $75 ship absolutely free.
Hi, friends. Welcome back. We're with Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, just outside the Washington, D.C. area. She worked directly with the Trump administration and is the president of Counterpoint Institute, a foreign policy institute, and president and national security expert with the experience in international development. She's also first international senior fellow for the Center of Fundamental Rights in Budapest, Hungary, which is a lot of what this book is based on. So we're going to have a great focus there. Dr. Shea holds a PhD and an MS in international development from Tulane University. And she and her husband, Chris Farrell, live just outside of D.C. We've got a Sheltie, and she's got a Yorkie and a Mastiff. So it's the small things in life that really sometimes define us. What do you think?
Well, you've got to have a friend when you live in D.C., or right outside of D.C., like you said. So we have two, yes.
And who said that? I think that was Eisenhower, wasn't it?
I don't remember, but it's extremely true. I didn't realize that till I moved here about 10 years ago, but it's true.
Well, that Southern hospitality you have certainly comes through here, and there's a lot of great Americans all over the state, all over the nation. But you are correct. There's a manner of behavior, Dr. Shea, that I think is profound and pervades many of the areas of this nation. I think that has to do more with our behavior and how that's changed over time, both as elected officials and appointees, along with we, the voters, as well. So the governance of our nation and other nations of the world are not, many look to us for advice and counsel and direction I find it interesting that you found your way to Budapest and how you became a senior fellow and did a deep dive on Hungary. And I'm interested in this because Hungary sort of stands apart from the rest of Central Europe and Eastern Europe in the way they have morphed over the years and stood alone, frankly, and isolated in many contexts from the rest of the world after they broke off from Russia. And that's where I'd like you to pick up. I'd like you to just like, I have several questions about the book. I've enjoyed it immensely because it's a wonderful springboard. We don't have to keep repeating mistakes if we look at the mistakes of others. What
Right.
say you?
Well, let me explain to the viewers, based on what you just said, why I wrote this book. And it's
Yeah.
because when I went over to Hungary to do research on why this little tiny nation, 10 million people, right in the heart of Europe, in the center, why it had become so big on the world stage. It was so hated by the leftists and so embraced by conservatives. Prime Minister Viktor Orban is embraced as a friend by Trump. Why? Why was this country able to push back on the wokeism that the EU and now the Biden administration has been pushing on them? And, the reason I ended up writing the book as a warning to Americans is because the people that I was interviewing in Hungary told me repeatedly that the rhetoric coming out of the United States reminded them of their Soviet occupation. So that's kind of a kick in the teeth to an American. I could understand why they said that, but I did a real deep dive on their history, and they were under Soviet occupation for 46 years until 1991. And they know what it's like not to be free. And people were saying to me, Shea, is there hope for America? Because you guys are acting like the communism that we were experiencing. And actually, Jean, I put 11 points of communist psychological warfare in the book that were written by our Department of Defense in 1959 and published as like a lesson guide for people working in the government on how to combat communism.
I read a few of those as well. You want to just focus on a few of those? I think they're ideal points to make.
Yes, let's do that, because every one of those points, as I show in the book, applies to the United States today. One major one that we experienced a few years ago was using a crisis in order to gain more control. And that's what we saw, especially with the Biden administration during COVID, vaccine mandates, lockdowns. We saw this all over the world. And I wanted to point out to people that this is serious. There's this central control of a communist behavior that divides people along lines of race, gender. Now we're seeing that. And it's so that they are able to control more. A second example, Jean, is the media here in the United States, certainly as a whole, is leftist media that has been literally controlled by the Biden administration. I mean, especially social media platforms. The Biden administration has had legal cases brought against them because of this. That's why I'm so grateful for shows like yours, podcasts like yours. Another one is controlling the narrative, which, just look at the words now that we use. Abortion is not abortion. It's sexual reproductive health care. This is just one example, but I put those points in there so Americans would start to understand what is happening.
I don't understand why history has to repeat itself, especially when we have so many things that are obvious and in front of us. Your book brings out these good lessons. I'm certainly were appreciated and respected by our leaders here in the States, at least under the Trump administration. But it seems that your friends' comments to you about what's America doing, why are we at risk of, we are better off because of you, going back to the Marshall Plan post World War II, and now when we're in some sense state of stability, You guys over there, meaning us, seem to be losing your principles,
Mhm.
your standards, your ways of life, your all of the policies and things that made us so great. Is this election that critical?
I believe that this election is extremely critical. I do believe we are in a fight for freedom versus slavery, a fight for democracy, real democracy, versus this top-down decision-making that the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, I want everybody to take that into account, has placed on Americans, because Kamala Harris has tried to reinvent herself over the past few months. And, some people are believing it, which I find hard to believe myself if you've paid attention at all at what is going on down at our border. I've been down there 4 or 5 times at least since Biden has come in office, and it's a disaster. We have no border, Gene. In fact, I've written many articles about this situation because what's really going on there is not being reported. I have an article coming out this week at Human Events that talks about that this has been the largest sex and human trafficking scheme in history, presided over by the Harris administration. But I could go on and on about that. But I
Well,
do.
just not to be too perverse about it, but the fact is, it is not. It's more than a rumor that Joe Biden, was showering with his daughter, and was in a recent interview with Rudy Giuliani, and Rudy Giuliani went on to describe, in his own words, somewhat of a perversion with this guy, that has exacerbated the sex trafficking issue, and these 325,000 poor children that are now gentrified somewhere in this nation, undocumented,
Yes.
either as slaves or sex slaves in some way, to me is an amazing corruption that George Soros perpetrated with
Yes.
the elite neo-leftists that put these NGOs in place around the nation to propagate this whole mantra of thinking in the cities and towns and villages around this nation. And your book hits it. It hits it the way it's now. And here we have Kamala and the gang announcing this week that Trump is Hitler, and all of this fascist talk going on. Would you describe what fascism really means and how Viktor Orban would look at fascism as compared to what he's doing now?
Yeah, well, you reminded me of something. Hungarians would laugh about this all the time because I don't know if you realize this. Well, actually, you do. You read the book. But Prime Minister Orban did not want to participate in this war that Ukraine has against Russia. They have taken in millions and millions of refugees. I've been in the Ukrainian refugee center in Hungary, actually, but they did not want to contribute weapons. They did not think it was a good thing. They thought that peace negotiations should be made immediately. Because of that, he has been called a Russia lover, a Russia propagandist, and they just laugh at that because, like I said, they were under Soviet rule for 46 years. I got to interview a couple of men one in his late 80s, one in his 90s, that were there as children in Budapest when the Soviets rolled in and pushed the Germans out, actually. And these little kids were down in different basements in a similar area of the city while the Russian soldiers were raping women as a method of war. I mean, they lived under this communist rule. And I was able to use these stories and interviews in the book. And one of them, the gentleman in his 80s, I said, how did you feel when they left? And he said it was the absence of fear for the first time in my life when the Russians were, finally left. I got off a little bit on a tangent there, but there's so much to
Yeah.
tell. There's so much to tell. Oh, Gene, this is the example I wanted to say. There's a place in Budapest called the House of Terror, and I think every American should visit it because it was the headquarters for Nazi Germany when they occupied. And in this headquarters, there's a basement down there where political opponents and people that just wanted to live their lives freely were punished, tortured, and killed. Now, guess what? Those were the Nazis, right? The fascists. Nazi, actually, that word has the word socialism in it. Okay. They were also a form of socialism. Then the Soviets, the communists roll in, also a form of socialism. They also had their headquarters, their police did, at the House of Terror, where they punished and tortured the people that disagreed with them. So when I was talking to some of these Hungarians that were children around this time, they said, you know, Shea, to us, there is nothing different between a fascist and a communist. They both want control, and they will do it. They will do it by degrading humanity. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to explain that. That's a crazy place to go visit. I've been there many times, that House
You know
of
what?
Terror.
Yeah, what you're talking about reminds me of the, Dachau camp in Germany and some of the others I've gone to, where you're witnessing some of the history. Thank God Germany preserved some of these sites where the massacre of the Jews occurred as a reminder, as an intentional reminder. I presume this is something similar. Folks, we're talking with Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell. She's the president of Counterpoint Institute. What's the URL address? Let me plug that real quick.
Thank you. It's just counterpointinstitute.org. And
.org.
if people go to the homepage, they can sign up for the newsletter and learn more about these things. We just put out 3 policy papers about the top challenges on the border for the next administration, what our real interest is in Ukraine, and also where your foreign tax-paying billions of dollars are going. Because, Gene, most Americans don't know that. And I want people to be informed when they go to the voting poll next week.
It's also been said, and you just correct me if I'm wrong, that the monies that Biden administration put into Ukraine and that kind of support going to Ukraine is something Viktor Orban chose not to do. He helped in other ways with centers for care for those refugees coming here to Hungary. But the truth of the matter is, Prime Minister Orban was smart enough not to participate on the money side because maybe some of it got back into the wrong hands by the criminals who were running the early days of Ukraine, and the Biden crime family and others being the beneficiary of funds that actually were kicked back to individuals here in the States, not to mention elsewhere in the world. These were the old Russian folks that were running Ukraine at the time before under Obama, and soon after, when they were morphing into a nation, a fraction of what it used to be, a nation that was now willing to deal with the West differently from the way Russia was. Yes or no?
You know, I want to say something at first about what you said about Prime Minister Viktor Orban. I don't doubt that there is some financial corruption. Yes, on the side of the Ukrainian government, they have. We can talk about that in a minute, but I'm talking about with our administration. Representative Paul Gosar, who actually is one of the people that endorsed my book, he said he was certain that, by the Biden administration's obsession with funding Ukraine had something to do with his financial ties there. And actually, Dean, can I mention this before I continue to answer that? I always forget to do this. Tucker Carlson also endorsed the book. General Michael Flynn, Lou Dobbs, the great late Lou Dobbs, and Carrie Lake wrote the foreword. But I went off on a tangent there. Thank you for that.
No, that's good. And in fact, let me interrupt you and say, here's Tucker's comment. It's the most basic duty of leaders to care about people they govern. It's a measure of how rare this is in the modern world that the nation of Hungary is now the hope for the West. That's what I was driving to earlier.
Right.
Here's Central Europe and nations like Hungary is what America may now have to aspire to. What's going on?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Gene, I've had people ask me many times, what happened to America? And it's not just one answer. I think it comes from many different avenues. One thing is that Frankfurt School that everybody hears about that came over from Germany, which was actually a communist school, and it infiltrated through the United States. Advisors from the Frankfurt School early on were advising, professors were advising FDR. Okay, so FDR had communists in his circle,
Yeah.
and some of them were from this Frankfurt School. So we start with that, and it has continued to infiltrate in our educational system. I think we did something stupid also after World War II. Yeah, we gave Stalin all of these satellite countries, Hungary being one of them, instead of, in fact, he said at Yalta that he was going to allow fair and free elections in these countries. And, that never happened. He said that he was going to preside over democracy in these countries. That never happened. And we looked the other way. So communism had the ability to gain strength and spread. I believe also, this is my personal belief, that we have forsaken the principles we were founded on, which come from our Judeo-Christian heritage. So many people now have taken their eyes from something greater than them, God, and put it on, government. That doesn't work, folks. That doesn't work.
Yeah. Does this go back to Obama? I mean, could we see a Muslim invasion of Ukraine? And was that Obama-Biden controlled White House plan all along? And why does Ukraine stand apart from the rest of Europe? Europe came together, especially through the EU initiative, to basically gang up, if you will, against America, the very people who helped protect them World War I and World War II, and our generosity is biting us, and that. Not to stray, but the thought just came to my mind about how Donald Trump talks about helping that poor snake that he picks up to cure and recover. And the old woman picks up the snake, and she's surprised that the snake bit her after she cures the snake. Is this what we're seeing again?
Well, I think that we do have responsibility for what's going on in Ukraine right now and for the invasion. I think actually that we have some responsibility for the provocation of it. It is totally unlawful. Putin should have never done it. But yes, that does go back to Obama's dealings in Ukraine, definitely. The other thing is that, we told. So a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I also wrote a paper on this. There are a lot of experts that agree that we gave verbal assurances to Russia back in, 1991, 1990, that we would not continue to expand NATO towards his borders. We have continued to do that. Ukraine, he even told George Bush, is my red line. And he told Biden, Ukraine is my red line. Yet Biden continued to push for Ukraine to be in NATO. So a lot of people think this sounds harsh, but here's the reality. Right now, Ukraine's government is extremely corrupt. It is authoritarian. They are not NATO ready. A lot of people disagree with me on this. Zelensky fired a lot of his top defense ministers because of taking money, skimming money off of things that would have gone for troops. He has outlawed his political opposition. He has made media there nationalized, the TV media. And we know, of course, about closing down the churches. I mean, I could go on and on about that. That's not what we were here to talk about today, but there is corruption. I feel terribly for the Ukrainian people. And that's a lot of the reason that actually at Counterpoint, we've been calling for peace negotiations since the war began. because if you look at the situation, Ukraine cannot beat a bigger and more militarized country. It's just not going to happen. And I'm sitting here today, 2 years later, Gene, knowing now that the Biden-Harris administration has an ongoing plan for this war. They didn't think Ukraine could even win this year. They have funding and have signed long-term agreements. So I have said that if Kamala Harris wins, we're going to have another American forever war.
Yeah, here we go, Vietnam #2. I mean, the fact of the matter is this, and I think you mentioned this as well, over 400,000 Ukrainians have been killed that may or may not go reported. You've got, the Hungarians are very generous people, and they're willing to open the doors to be civil and humane in the care for others. But I don't think they are obligated to let the outside forces invade and run roughshod over their nation. And all of a sudden, that happens to be the righteous indignation of Viktor Orban and the policies he's creating there. And that's the message I hope reaches America. That's why I'm so glad President Trump and Prime Minister Orban are such good friends, because to me, Trump sees in Orban a distinction between preserving and protecting, it's called healthy selfishness, being selfish about your own family, your own street, your own village, your own nation first, before you get too generous with others. Whereas Europe is becoming so, they're developing communist tendencies.
Absolutely.
And they're allowing themselves to be vulnerable to invasion. Poland and Hungary, two good allies over there we should hold on to.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The European Union has actually sanctioned Hungary billions of dollars because of their beliefs on radical gender theory, because of their beliefs where they don't want this mass illegal immigration, and also because they did not want to contribute to the war in in Ukraine. And one thing too to explain about that, Gene, that's important is the infrastructure for oil and gas in Hungary is Russian. It's even Soviet era. And, in the beginning of the war, Prime Minister Viktor Orban said, our economy will be crushed if we, sanction Russian energy. So that, and also the fact that he does, I've met with Viktor Orban twice now, actually. And he has a heart for the Ukrainian people. Do you know there are ethnic Hungarians dying in Ukraine in this war? And yes, like I said, I've been in the Ukrainian refugee center in Hungary, where they've taken in millions. This place, Gene, it even had a place for animals to come and get veterinary care and food and water. I mean, it was this huge center.
Yeah, I think you
I
mentioned
know
that.
they've spent millions of dollars.
I'm just trying to figure out how the Hungarian men ended up in a Ukrainian war, especially when there's such a disparity in the social, cultural aspects, the political aspect. Was this a volunteer individual decision by Hungarians to serve in Ukraine?
No, it really goes back to something called the Treaty of Trianon. And you know what? I've totally gone blank on the year. I think it was in 1929 that this happened. But Hungary lost about 2/3 of its territory. It lost millions of its people. And so some of those Hungarians when the line was divided, were left in other countries. And that's how it happened. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has actually offered those people that were outside the lines of the Treaty of Trianon, he's offered them citizenship. So some of them have dual citizenship now. Because Hungary, they believe that they aren't just the country with the borders, they believe they are all of the Hungarians in the surrounding area. This was, I can't believe, I can't remember the exact year. I think it was 29. It is such a big deal to them even today, to their psyche, to the way that they view themselves, because Hungary was very weakened, and we had a lot to do with this happening. Hungary was very weakened, and therefore they were vulnerable when Hitler comes around again. So,
I was in Latvia, not too far away, last year, and one of my experiences, which stunned me as an American, was I was in Riga, and if you talk to an educated person in Riga, it's amazing how the story they just told, you just told, parallels what they said. Both were invaded by Russia, and both have a contempt for Russia. And even though Latvia came into the United Nations, I think in the early 1970s, and became a player, they still withhold a little bit of resentment against Russia. The Russians were so oppressive in their overtaking of Latvia that they demanded that the Russian language and writings and everything else be Russian cultural based. Well, the Latvians had to literally sweep their language under the carpet and read at nighttime to maintain their culture. I felt the same way in your book about how Hungary did their best to preserve their culture, even though they had to tolerate the oppressive overreach of Russians in there. You write in the book about Budapest. Can you explain the split between Buda and Pest? And that's so clever. I like the way that came together.
yeah, it's just, and I can't remember the exact history. I'm not a historian, even though I wrote a lot of this history. The first time that I went there was actually in 2019, and I was
Huh.
like, there's a Buddha and a Pest. Yeah, they're divided by the Danube River. And
Yeah.
I actually, Dean, I think I wrote about how exactly in my book, but I cannot remember. But
Well,
on the Buddha side is where the Buddha Castle is, and it's an amazing hill, lots of history
that's
there.
right.
And if you go to the castle, it's so interesting because on the outside, you can see centuries all on the outside, centuries of different types of building
Yeah.
material, all different kinds of colors. And it's fascinating. It really is.
Well, it's amazing how the successful nations of the world, the surviving nations of the world, do not forget their past. They don't have to live it or believe it in it completely. I hope that's true about America in the 2020s. But you certainly can learn from it. And one of the things that bothers me about that sort of influence over a nation, we have a U.S. ambassador by the name of David Pressman. He passes himself off as an LGBT advocate and the far left, and not for the citizens of the U.S. Why is he being so heavy-handed in his approach to try to tell Hungary they need to take on a social or political or a sexual preference that maybe the Hungarians don't want?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because he's a
Yeah.
diplomat. He's not
What?
there to antagonize them, and that's what he's done. It's because the Biden administration has a real disdain for Hungary. Pressman, in his confirmation, talked about the authoritarianism and backsliding of Hungary. This is a bunch of baloney. They have a parliamentary system there. I have actually friends who have gone over, actually from Judicial Watch. My husband is part of Judicial Watch to certify their last presidential election. Now, the Soros organizations have come heavy against them because they believe in the family. They don't believe in this radical gender theory. That's why the Biden administration doesn't like them. I mean, Pressman is married to a man and they have 2 children. He was deliberately put there because of the Biden administration's disdain. How do I know this? All you have to do is go to Pressman's social media, his ex posting, and you see the unkind ugliness that he exudes towards the Orban administration and the people of Hungary. He has, I've spent months and months in Hungary at this point, and people are free there. I've
Yeah.
seen gay couples walking around freely. But if you listen to Pressman, they're all oppressed. Everybody's oppressed. Nobody cares. You know, it's like the United States in the 1980s. It's just not being forced down our throats where people that believe in the family unit, a mother and a father, you know, that is still what the majority of the people there actually through a referendum voted for and put in their constitution,
Wow.
that the man is the father and a woman is the mother, not this transgender stuff. And they put up some laws to protect children against radical transgender theory. That really ticked off the Biden administration. It's just it's a disdain, and they're backed up by the European Union on this as well.
Well, this is certainly a counterculture that we best learn from. That's what I said when we started this interview today, that maybe we have something to learn from the people we saved 50, 60 years ago in
Yeah.
previous wars, and that's the culture. That's I think the eating of the enemy from within is the newfound Nazism, of course, but it's not from Donald Trump. It's from communists who are trying to dismantle the structure of this nation from within.
Yeah.
It's easier and less expensive than bullets and missiles flying. And I hope and pray that this book gets read by many, because it awakened me. It awoken me to many of the distinctions that exist today in the United States as compared with Europe, who we helped save back in the 40s and earlier. It's amazing to me how a guy like a George Soros keeps popping up, not only in your book, but in several other books recently. He's referenced with respect to NGOs, non-government organizations or agencies, and he's now got his tentacles out into several agencies within the EU. I'm concerned that Hungary and Poland could be adversely affected, or the opposite's true. With Trump coming in, the EU, Greater Europe, finds itself dismantling many of the policies they first created themselves for. Yes, the consolidation of money might still be of interest to everybody if they put their personal beliefs, personal issues aside. But the fact of the matter is, I think the strong leaders in the future might be the Polands, the Latvias, and the Hungarians. And is there no small coincidence that just a few days ago we see Putin offering to the media the notion that I'm now prepared for some peace treaty or peace talks with Ukraine?
No, it's
Maybe it
not a,
maybe it's because he sees the likelihood of Donald Trump in 7 days.
absolutely. I think that's right. But you know what, Gene, he has actually been saying in one form of or the other that he was open to negotiations this whole time. He even was open to negotiations before he invaded. He kept telling Biden about the Ukraine thing. So let me explain.
Okay, so what bothers me more then is, why did Biden not step up to offer to ameliorate the situation with a and put himself in the position of facilitating some sort of treaty of peace?
I don't know, because he was adamant that Ukraine would go into NATO. Like I said, it may have something to do with his financial ties to Ukraine. Representative Gosar said he thinks for sure. So I don't know, because this has not been a war, for democracy. Zelensky is not democratic. He's not. They are full of corruption. I mean, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I was going to say something else too, and I forgot. What were we talking about? It was
Well,
important.
I apologize. It's a bad habit of mine. I end up, in the spirit of the conversation, it kind of drops onto different topics, and that's what makes this podcast kind of unique. I think we cover a lot of ground, but sometimes we hop around, hopefully with the interest of the public in mind too. But I think you were talking about what the sovereignty issues might be. Did you want to finish up on David Pressman in Hungary?
You know what? It was a good point. If it was that good, it'll come back to me though.
Well, it'll come back. Hungary's a Christian nation for over 1,000 years.
Yes, that's right.
Republic with a democrat constitution, but the citizens there do not mind the gays that you were talking about. But they don't want to be pushed. They're sort of, okay, we recognize it. It can exist, but we're going to be friendly with them because they're friendly with us. I think what you were trying to get to is that we here in America don't want we don't want the reverse culture being pushed on us.
Right. It's not freedom. It's not equality. Right now things are being stuffed down your throat so much
Yeah.
that as a woman, if I have to go into a bathroom with a man who thinks he's a woman, you are trampling on my rights. So all of a sudden, it's not all Americans have the same equality under the law. Look at the 14th Amendment. No, that's not what it is. The activists on this radical transgender nonsense, etc., they want special rights. That's exactly what it is. And Jean, you hit on, Soros again. I want to explain to your viewers the importance of what Soros is doing with his billions of dollars. There's something called the Corporate Equality Index. This index it is an index that corporations it's been implemented by an NGO called the Human Rights Campaign. Now, all these corporations all over the United States now are, we got to get a great grade on this corporate equality index that shows that we're LGBT transgender friendly, to the point that Fox News now adheres to the corporate equality index. This is something made up by an organization funded by Soros. This is how these kind of things have crept into the United States. And we're, because we don't want to be called anti-LGBT or haters of some kind, we no longer can just be free people, free Americans. We're being divided on gender and race, which, again, is a tenet of Marxism. The Marxism of the communist has infiltrated here, and we're acting like it's a normal thing. It's not. One way we can fight back on it is having our own organizations. That's why I built Counterpoint Institute, in order to push back on this and say, no, this is not what our country was based on.
Yeah, I see a complete, the door swings back in life, I guess, sometimes not as quickly as we'd like. But what I'm witnessing now, even since 2 or 3 years ago when I first met you, a transition, this term called mass formation psychosis, the cancer from within, the attempt to transform the social and political mores of this nation. You're talking about part of that with the transgender issue, is not a denial of transgender right, but I think we as Americans sometimes push too hard and it goes too far. For example, we have 27 amendments to the Constitution. They are all rights-based, liberty and freedom-based, entitlement-based. They're protecting the rights and entitlements of all citizens of this nation. But like you said, it can't be such a right that goes so far as to impugn my rights. You have no right to put a tampon dispenser machine in my men's room. How's that for an answer?
I mean, that's ludicrous.
Unless we're in Europe and they're unisex bathrooms.
Right.
The context is still good. You know what I'm trying to say. The fact of the matter is we need amendments to the Constitution that capture the spirit of what you're reporting from Viktor Orban and other areas that say, hey, your rights are pure. You're right. You're entitled to them, but not at my expense. You have those liberties and freedoms, but not at my expense. You have the right to display yourself as you see fit, but not on my White House lawn naked. You have the obligation to be a citizen and do your fair part. I don't have the obligation to carry you and let you stay home eating bonbons on the couch, taking a check from government after COVID instead of incentives from government to get people back to work is the kind of, and we didn't even talk about the COVID crisis, both here and in Europe. Do you want to throw that a quick comment in on that?
Well, that goes back to what I talked about in the beginning, that that's another tenet of Marxism, to use a crisis to gain control of the people. And that's exactly what they did. Another one of those communist psychological warfare points. Another one of those points that they used in conjunction was to create fear. Fear took a hold of America, I believe, even more than COVID. It was a very serious thing, us going through this pandemic. I'm not trying to downplay it, but the fear of it caused people to act in ways, I think, that was much worse than what we were dealing with. It created total chaos. And Gene, our Constitution gives us the tools already to deal with discrimination. I think about it, women weren't even given the right to vote until 1920. But what did we do? We kept pushing, using the Constitution against the people who, by the way, were Democrats, that said that we couldn't have the right to vote, until we changed that. What did African American people do? They were certainly discriminated against. They used our laws in this land till we had a Civil Rights Act and continued to push against that. I have actually done a lot of work in the transgender LGBT rights sphere. It is a different thing. There is not historical research data showing that there is like this ongoing epidemic of discrimination against LGBT people. It is not. It has become so big because of the activists pushing this. However, do I think sometimes they are? Absolutely. And guess what? They have the tools in our Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, to deal with these things. But what, I have been watching as I work on Capitol Hill over the past 7 years, I've seen is that laws are being changed to include SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. Why is that a big deal? Because these laws are actually erasing the differences between men and women. Then you get into a whole host of other problems, especially when there's, like privileges for women, like in divorce or child custody or alimony, and this sort of the Violence Against Women Act. I worked on this when they were putting gender identity nonsense into it. And guess what was happening, Gene? Men were showing up at women's only domestic violence shelters and forcing their way in. I mean, there were legal cases about this. So this is what I'm saying. We're creating chaos where we have the tools to work with for any kind of discrimination.
Dr. Shea, we need to do this again.
Okay.
We have opened up Pandora's box.
Yes,
and you have really, and together I enjoyed this conversation because we hopscotched around on a few points, and I did it intentionally because there's so many aspects, folks, of this lovely lady, Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, that I'd like you to meet. Dr. Shea, please give a pitch on your book, please.
Okay. Well, like I said, it is a warning to Americans, but you know what? It's something you would enjoy reading as well, because it explains all the nonsense that is going on today and gives us a platform to think about it. I also put in the back of the book 12 ways to bring the country back, and they're very simple. One of them is, like I mentioned earlier, Gene, investing in organizations like that stand on freedom and conservative principles. Very simple things that, instead of a radical left having control of our institutions, like our educational institutions, etc., we can take steps. Media, we can take steps. You're doing one of those right now, Gene. You've taken a step to take back over the media. There should be a balance there, but right now there's not. The radical leftist media is controlling things, and it's not the principles that America was built on. So anyway, the history, there's lots of good history in the book too, to understand what happened, how Marxism really acts, how it infiltrated into the United States, and there's hope. I like to
And
give
how it's
hope.
the beginning of communism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. In closing, we ran out of time. Where can we buy this? Where can I get this book?
Amazon.com. It's on there. It's been on there, I guess, for about 8 months now. I wrote it in December of last year. It was published. So, but I appreciate it, Jean. And I would love everybody also to go to our website for more information on all the things that we were talking about, counterpointinstitute.org. You can follow me on X at Dr. Shea_DC or at Counterpoint DC, and also on Instagram and Facebook. And we'd love to hear from you. I enjoy hearing from people, unless it's ugly stuff. I get a lot like that. If you disagree, tell me why you disagree. Don't call me names, right? That's great. Let's disagree. Let's talk.
And that's what I like about the Republican Party. We've all had at our conferences where we've been to, where I first met you, there was a natural exchange. I mean, how do you get 1,000 people in a room and not have 100% consensus? You work through a deliberative process of coming to understand each other, and that's done with a spirit, an attitude, behavior that our intending founding fathers wanted to collaborate and bring it together. But if I start the conversation with a tone of vitriol, and which is hate, which is an admonishment that and discounting your comment as not having any value at all, then the conversation goes nowhere. And that's what I like about Donald Trump. Talk about the United Nations. He brings Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, and who am I missing? He's got all these.
RFK Jr.
RFK Jr. Excuse me, that's who I meant. Coming together in one venue last week to support the nation first, not an ideology. A nation that's trying to be based on protecting all of us, not the select few. Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, thank you for joining us here today. I can't thank you enough. I hope you come back soon.
Absolutely.
And folks, again, the book's on Amazon, The Last Warning to the West by Shea Bradley-Farrell. Thank you again, ma'am.
Jean, see you again soon, I hope.
And thank all of you for joining us again for another episode on Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's Grassroots Truthcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.